They say it's so hot here in Texas, we've installed fans outside. We're here at Sandia's Swift Farm to find out how these wind generators may be affecting the weather on In the Field. If there's one thing we can say about West Texas, it's almost always breezy. And this makes for a perfect place for Sandia National Laboratories to test their wind generators here on the Sandia Swift Farm. I'm here today with Texas Tech University Associate Professor of Atmospheric Science, Brian Ancell. How are you today?
I'm great, how are you?
Now you are actually looking at these wind generators from a different angle. Tell me a little bit about what is inadvertent weather modification.
So inadvertent weather modification is we make modification to the atmosphere through things like wind farms or irrigation, and those modifications grow in time and affect the weather downstream. So turbines or wind farms can actually make a local modification that can then move downstream and change the weather hundreds of miles away.
How long have you been looking at this, and what are some of the things that you've found?
We've probably been looking at it for about 2 to 3 years now, and we found that indeed large wind farms or areas of irrigation can modify certain weather features. So mid-latitude cyclones, these are the weather systems that bring fronts, thunderstorms to West Texas. Those can actually be modified and then continue to modify further downstream and actually change the placement of where thunderstorms would be due to the wind farms or irrigation in the first place.
How are you doing this? You've got an NSF grant for this?
Yes, so this is an NSF funded project, and the way we're doing it is with a numerical weather prediction model. So this NSF project funds these simulations that we're running and putting the effects of wind farms, irrigation, urban heat islands into the model and studying how they evolve downstream.
What are we going to do today? Tell me a little bit about how we can help with your research.
Yeah, well, we could look at these turbines here. We can use a small model of these turbines. We've got one at an exhibit at the Texas Tech Museum that the project also funds, and then we also have some that we can play with ourselves to kind of look at how wind turbines modify atmospheric variables away from the turbine themselves.
All right, well, let's do it.
All right.
All right. So this looks like a good representation of an area off the caprock. What's going on here, Brian?
Yeah, so this is a small model of how wind turbines can modify the local weather right around the turbine.
Okay.
So this model has some wind coming in from left to right, and if I start that, it'll start to turn these turbine blades here.
Okay.
And the electricity coming off of those turbine blades will actually light up the double T on the back wall there. It'll take a second, but there it goes. So that's actually the electricity coming off of that turbine.
Oh, all right.
And what this model demonstrates is that if there was a turbine in front of that turbine, it's going to change the wind around that turbine back there. And that's going to reduce the wind and reduce the power coming off that turbine.
Okay.
So let's just move that turbine out in front of the turbine behind it. And as it gets in front of the wind, it will start to spin. And now it's producing electricity. See that the double T on the back wall
starting to go off there.
Starting to go off. So what this is demonstrating is that this turbine is actually changing the wind field behind it. The turbines are changing the atmosphere around the turbine. In this case, it's wind speed, but you'd also find that it's changing temperature and moisture by mixing up the air.
So I can see now that this shows you what these turbines do to the weather in a localized area, but what you're actually finding is that the impacts that these have on the local area actually branch out much farther than most people realize. Can you show me a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. We've got a part of the exhibit over here that demonstrates that.
Okay.
And so these are two pieces of the exhibit. These are showing two different effects that humans can have on the atmosphere.
Okay.
So the top one is from a wind farm, and the bottom two images are from irrigation.
Okay.
This one shows the difference between two model simulations over 48 hours.
Okay.
One with a wind farm in this box right here. So this is a pretty large wind farm. You can think of it as an aggregate of wind farms.
Okay.
And another simulation with no wind farms there. And the colors here are the difference between those two simulations. So as this evolves in time, and early in the time, you can see in the window, you can see these differences right around the wind farm, and those propagate out away from the wind farm. and that's about 1 day's time. Now we're getting into the second day, and when we get out to about 48 hours, those differences are throughout most of the country at that point.
Wow,
And
that's,
even into Canada.
yeah, and up into Canada too. That's amazing. So I see how the wind farm is actually affecting a huge portion of the United States, and you're also finding that this is happening with irrigation. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, so that's what these plots down here show.
Okay.
So again, just like the loop, these are for two different cases, and they show the difference between two model simulations with and without irrigation. The run with irrigation is irrigation happening in this black box in both cases in the southern Texas Panhandle, where there's quite a bit of irrigation there now. And so what this shows, again, the colors are the difference between those two simulations. And you can see that these are both valid at 48 hours forecast time or simulation time. So 2 days after the irrigation happened, we're seeing all of these differences way far away from the irrigation in the first place. So the irrigation had caused these differences. You can see that on the color scale here. These are differences of up to 3 inches in both cases.
All right, so this is our simulated environment, huh?
Yep.
What's going on here? I guess this is the wind?
That's the wind. It represents the atmosphere with the wind in the atmosphere.
Okay, and what is that down there?
That is an anemometer, so that's measuring the wind speed.
So this is where we build a wind farm. All right, so what do I have to do here?
So you want to take this turbine and put it in front of the fan, between the fan and the anemometer.
Okay.
And you'll see that the wind is
it
causing
lit
it
up.
to spin, and it lights up, so that's producing electricity now.
Okay.
And the wind behind that, we're still measuring, and now it's down to about 4.5 miles per hour.
Oh wow, sure
So we
enough.
reduced the wind by about half, and that's because of the wake from the wind turbine. But in addition to the wind changing back there, the temperature is also changing. This is changing the mixing of things like temperature and moisture.
Okay.
And it's making changes to the atmosphere there because of the position or the existence of this wind turbine.
So when we have this happening in nature, and I realize there are many variables going on, do these generally slow down the path of the wind, or does it just depend on the day and where the wind is blowing from?
They can actually do both. So they can make the wind speed up around the blades and slow it down in the wake. But really, as a kind of a general picture of what's going on, the turbines themselves are changing the wind field. And that is changing, like I said, the mixing of temperature and moisture, and it even changes the pressure distribution. So by having these turbines here, it's making changes to the atmosphere and all these things with respect to if they were not there.
Well, that sounds like a massive amount of variables happening at one time and changing with the weather and with the temperature. How do you track all that stuff?
Yeah, so it's easy to track this right here with this toy model, but we're really interested in how these changes evolve downstream.
Okay.
So that's not something that we know right now. We know that changes happen around wind farms because we've measured them with things like anemometers. But to model how those changes go downstream is a much more complicated problem and very computationally intensive.
Computationally intensive. So computers?
Computers, lots of them, like these ones behind me.
Oh, okay.
And so this is a supercomputer here, which I do much of my modeling on.
Oh, man.
And I'm modeling things like this over a much larger area. So not just in a room, but over like the entire United States. I'm making changes to the model, like we were doing here with a wind turbine or a wind farm, and modeling how those changes evolve all the way downstream days later.
Wow. How do these supercomputers help you? Is this relatively new stuff that you're able to see?
Yep, it's new in terms of the non-local effects to the atmosphere. So again, we can measure around the wind farm to understand how things are happening near the wind farm. But to understand how those changes evolve downstream, you need to run a model simulation to understand that. And this is how we do it. Okay.
Well, I'd like to see how this sort of plays out in the modeling of the computer, I guess. Can we look at that too?
Yep, I can show you a image of a forecast simulation. Yeah. This is a 2-day forecast of wind speed at the surface. So the colors are wind speed, the blues and purples are windy, the yellows and greens and whites are not windy. And you can see how these features evolve over the 2-day period throughout the United States.
Okay, so why do you need a supercomputer to do this?
So there's a number of variables. The model is actually solving a bunch of differential equations to predict these variables in the future. So the variables we're predicting are wind, temperature, moisture, things like that, but we're predicting them every 12 kilometers over the entire United States. So that ends up being about 100 million variables we're trying to predict in the future. Sure.
So you got to crunch all those numbers, and they're changing all the time too, right?
That's right. So they're changing in time, and you need a supercomputer to crunch all those numbers, as you said.
Okay, but this is just the standard model. This is like what the Weather Channel or something like that does, right?
Yeah, this is one particular modeling system that I'm using to make forecasts. It does not include the effects of turbines, like we saw in the toy turbines that we looked at.
Okay.
But we could put that effect in here and then create another forecast and then take the difference between the two. And that's how we hope to understand the inadvertent weather modification caused by wind turbines.
Okay.
And that's what we saw at the museum when we looked at that loop of the difference field between two forecasts, one with and one without turbines.
So that's what you were talking about. In the future, this might help increase accuracy of weather prediction.
Yes, it could do that by including those effects.
Excellent. Well, listen, I've learned a lot about weather today. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
It's good to meet you.
You too.
So, what have we learned? Well, wind farms create inadvertent weather modification. And that's something that researchers like Brian Ancell are trying to understand. And by understanding that, we might have a better idea of how human activity impacts the weather. For In the Field, I'm John Davis. Oh my God, I blew a 19. I'm going to jail tonight. Look at the length of this propeller blade. This is one of these wind generator propeller blades, and it just goes on forever. This is actually a small one. I mean, I'm 6'4", look how big it is. Make sure to check us out on Facebook and YouTube for more awesome adventures in the field.